Welcome in to the best in paranormal programming. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Man, have we got a show for you today. We're going to talk time travel today and the aspects around time travel with our guest, Mike Ricksecker. The lyrics go, time, 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 see what's become of me. While I looked around for my possibilities, I was so hard to please, but look around, leaves are brown, and the sky is a hazy shade of winter. The Bangles didn't write that, people. It was, of course, Simon and Garfunkel and a hazy shade of winter. But think about the lyrics for a second without singing it in your head. I know, we're setting ourselves up for the Mandela effect. We'll talk about that later, too. Time, 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 see what's become of me while I look around for my possibilities. We're going to talk about possibilities today. There's a lot of them out there. Mike Ricksecker is our guest today, has a brand new book out there, Travels Through Time. Oh my gosh, this book, folks, I got to tell you, I'm enthralled with it. I'm in love with this book. Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel and Stacked Time Theory, Connecting the Universe. Let me tell you a little bit about Mike before we bring him on today, because you are absolutely, again, going to fall in love, not only with the book, but you're going to fall in love with some of the ideas that Mike has about this book. Mike is the author of the Amazon best-selling A Walk in the Shadows, A Complete Guide to Shadow People, the esoteric tome Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, and 8 historic paranormal books. He has appeared on multiple television shows and programs, including History Channel's Ancient Aliens and the Unexplained, Travel Channel's The Alaska Triangle, Discovery's Fright Club, Animal Planet's The Haunted, multiple series on Gaia TV, and more. Mike is also the producer and director of the docuseries The Shadow Dimension, available on several streaming platforms, and produces additional full-length content on ancient wisdom, lost civilizations, and the supernatural on his extensive YouTube channel. Let's bring him in right now, folks, to Darkness Radio, Mike Ricksecker. Hi, Mike. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back, Tim. It's always great talking with you.
Thank you, my friend, for being back on. Boy, like I said, I fell in love with this book, man. Time travel to me has always been, and forgive me for saying this, a little sketchy. I'll tell you where I first fell in love with it. It was, you're going to laugh when I say this, Fantastic Four comic books.
Oh, all right.
All right.
Right on.
A little sketchy, I know, but I got an affinity for John Byrne and Fantastic Four comic books. And when I found out that Marvel was going to bring Kang the Conqueror into the movies, now keep in mind Marvel has as you put it in the book, has a stream of time consciousness when it comes to time travel.
Right.
So right away when I read your book, I say to myself, well, I don't know that you're going to agree with Kang the Conqueror in any of the Marvel movies. I don't know what your thoughts are. Let's get your thoughts right away on Kang the Conqueror in Marvel movies.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel. What's interesting and what I think is good is they are introducing some of the different concepts. They're not accurate. Like okay, we're going to have a tesseract as a magic cube, and that opens a portal, that sort of thing. So it's like there's pieces within that that might be accurate, but most of it's not. But it at least gets people thinking about the ideas and concepts of time travel, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. The movies, I'll just say they disturb me a little bit because they don't follow a lot of the great ideas that the House of Ideas has. But, the fact that they're getting the characters out there tickles me a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was those Fantastic Four comics and the idea that anything was possible. That really got me involved with the idea of time travel. Then, of course, you venture outside the Fantastic Four comics and you see different things out there. There's Doctor Who. There's other things that get you thinking about. And you point out some wonderful movies, Somewhere in Time, things like that inside the book, which really gets you thinking about things like that. One of those things I want to bring up right away in the program. And we have so little time to cover all this. I think in order for us to sit down and actually talk about the book, we would need about 5-6 hours. We don't have that here.
Probably.
So I may skip ahead a little bit to different topics so that we can get it all in. I want to talk about, first of all, time as a stream or a river. We refer to it as a stream or a river versus what it actually is. Explain to people, your theory as to what time actually is.
Yeah, time. I mean, for one, time is a human construct. We've come up with this idea to describe our reality. We use it as a tool. It helps us keep track of the seasons, when to plant the crops, helps us, to show up at the right moment at work so that our supervisors don't get upset with us, that sort of stuff. When we think of when we think of time as a river, and it kind of accurately describes the way we're experiencing things right now. But the thing is that, time isn't the river itself. It's constricted by the banks, and the banks of the river is what's holding time in place going downstream. If we were to remove the banks, all of that would spill out and just become, one concurrent giant puddle or lake or whatever. And, you'd be able to step into, each moment, for lack of a better term. But the way that I like to look at time, because time doesn't really exist again, is that I have this thing called stacked time theory. And you can, do some research into Einstein, look at his ideas about the space-time continuum and his block universe and that sort of thing. Is very similar. But each moment, take where you're sitting right now, each moment that has happened, is happening, and will happen are all happening concurrently. And I liken it to, a stack of photographs. Each moment is a photograph and they're all stacked on top of each other. And every once in a while we get a glimpse of another moment in time. And what's happening is, two of those moments happen to be resonating at the same frequency a little bit. We might get a glimpse of what we might call apparition or ghost. We might see a whole scene play out before us from some time from long ago. And really that's, a time slip. And we're actually getting a glimpse of that moment playing itself out because of the frequency, resonance, and vibration.
I want people to hold on to that theory tightly during this program, because we're going to keep referring back to the stacked time theory.
Sure.
And at the end of this program, I have a theory myself from having read the book, and I'm going to bring it back to aliens because I don't know if you saw William Shatner's quote earlier this week when News Nation had talked to him. I don't want to spring any surprises on you here, Mike, but you might have seen it. You might not have seen it.
Bring it. I haven't seen it, but go ahead and spring it on me.
Okay. So, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, because you do have a section in the book about aliens, and I don't want to jump to the end, but it has to do with time travel and aliens, and we'll talk about that later in the program. Right. But here's essentially the quote when Shatner was asked about aliens earlier last week. They had asked him, well, what do you think about the hearings, the Arrow hearings on Capitol Hill? And he basically called it, I'm paraphrasing here, but nonsense. And he said if there were aliens out there, that they would be visiting here, they wouldn't be hiding or even hiding in plain sight. They'd be making themselves known, much like we would be making ourselves known on other planets. I have a feeling I know why he said that, but we're going to get to that at the end of the program. Okay. Because I, much like you, see what you're saying with stacked time theory and have my own theory. And I'm going to throw it past you and see what you say here.
All right, sure.
Because when I started to read your book, it really started to open my eyes on different things. I do have something I want to tell you offline, though. There's something confidential that was passed to me. I know people are going to go, why can't you say it online, Tim? Why can't you say it online? That was passed along to me by somebody confidentially. And it's really, boy, it's a barn burner when it comes to information. That's why I want to share it with you confidentially. It's not something for public ears yet, but it will be soon. That's the thing. And right. Yeah.
Well, now you've got me curious.
Yeah. And I think and it will be something you'll eventually hear in these hearings that, again, we'll get to it at the end of the program because this alien stuff is really, really, really interesting.
Teasing me, Tim.
I know, Mike. I'm like that. I'm just one big tease. So we talk about stacked time theory, and we're talking about being able to pick one of those photographs and being able to sit outside a time construct. So we've got different dimensions. And in the book, you talk brilliantly about, the first dimension, second dimension, third dimension. People may not be familiar with dimensions. Can you just quickly go over what those dimensions are?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I give a little dimensional primer there in the chapter on stacked time theory because, I think people need to understand the way the universe is constructed, at least as far as our understanding right now, what our theoretical physics have come up with. And our theoretical physics say there's up to 11 hyperspatial dimensions, and whatever dimension that you are currently in, you can see all of them below you perfectly fine. So we have first dimension, which is just a basic line. Second dimension, which is a plane. So think of like a piece of paper. A piece of paper is technically three-dimensional because it has a very, very thin edge.
Sure.
But we can think of it, plane as that. And then, of course, you have your 3D objects. So, anything like that. And then you have the fourth dimension, which is time. And that is where we reside. And what's actually really fascinating about that is our consciousness is the fourth dimension. That's how we're experiencing the world. And that consciousness resides in a 3D object, which is our body.
Okay.
So anything above that, fifth dimension and beyond, would be able to see time the way that we see, like a 3D object. It's something that we would be able to, hold and manipulate and that sort of thing. So, that's kind of the basics of dimensions. But when we look at the possibilities of time travel, it would be from coming outside our dimension, the fourth dimension, from the fifth or beyond, and be able to come into this dimension at will.
Wow. Okay. So we have yet, 6 dimensions we really don't have a grasp of. Or do we? Do we have a grasp? Does science really know what these dimensions are? And can we?
Yeah, a lot of them they claim they're around the subatomic level.
Okay.
They don't. Again, it's more of when we talk about these different quote unquote hyperspatial dimensions. We're talking about they've put math to this. Really, is what it is.
Okay.
With all their different theories, they've calculated out how universe would work, and they've come up with these 11. One of them is controversial, because it's dimension 0, which is a point. So that one's right. They debate on. But what's interesting though is you have to think about this. If we are residing, in the fourth dimension, you have other entities that are around us, things that we can't see with our own eyes and all that. You're going to have other beings living within these other dimensions. I think that's something that people don't really think about. Okay, we have all these dimensions. We're in one of them, and we're able to live and breathe and all that. But in these other dimensions, there's going to be other beings as well. So this is where we get into like interdimensional beings and how they may be visiting us and these sorts of things.
You bring up something that we talked about last week. That was Fermi's paradox, and that's in the book. Yeah. You touch on it briefly. Let's skip ahead a little bit in the book and talk a little bit about Fermi's paradox for a moment.
Sure, absolutely. So Fermi's paradox is the idea that we are essentially assuming that there is other life out there within the universe without having seen or experienced that other life that's out there. Now, those within the ufology community, those who have claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials, would argue it just based on that alone. I argue it from a different angle. Okay. Because, we as humans are very presumptuous and arrogant and all these sorts of things. And so therefore we view the whole rest of the universe as extraterrestrials, and we're humans. Yeah, except the whole rest of the universe sees us as the extraterrestrials. True. So, absolutely. So therefore, if you just take the Milky Way galaxy, which has billions and billions of stars and systems and all that, we know of at least one extraterrestrial solar system with life, and that's us. So just, simple math, you expand that out to all the other, galaxies throughout the universe, and we're talking, trillions upon trillions of possibilities here. So I think it's really just perspective.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing too is when we talk about, well, there not being any other extraterrestrial life out there, if you really want to get simple and stupid about it, bacteria falls from outer space onto this planet. Technically, that's an extraterrestrial visitor. I mean, it really is a simple form of life, but it is life. I mean, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they have found plankton, on the International Space Station and other craft that have gone up there that's living.
Yeah.
So there's definitely intersolar species that can survive through space, and then hey, how did we get here? If throw aside some of the different ideas of we're a species that live somewhere else in the galaxy and colonized here, et cetera. And I enjoy those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
If you just take like a natural evolutionary process, how did we get here? Well, the Earth didn't always exist here.
Right.
Our planet, us, the whole rest of the solar system, we're all made of stardust.
Yeah.
So what created us did come from the universe.
Exactly. I want to jump ahead just a little. Again, we're jumping ahead. But again, I want to get a lot of I want to touch on some of the topics in the book,
sure.
And I want to leave the meat of the book available. But I also want to get some examples of some stuff from the book too, because you do such a wonderful job of painting examples in the book too.
Thank you.
I want to talk about perspectives in time. The ancient Greeks had a wonderful way of, without knowing about what time was or what time may be. Can you give us some examples of ancient Greece and how they painted what they thought time was versus what it is now?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you get into like Aristotle, it's funny because as he's writing, you can kind of almost hear the gears grinding as he's trying to figure out, exactly what time is. And the Greek philosophers, they had some different ideas and they had some different concepts, and they were trying to toy around with, the idea, okay, time not existing, what is it, or the different layers of time, and this sort of thing. So, I think they were trying to really work that out. And like with Socrates, he really looked at it from, the idea of duality. So therefore, if you have one thing and then you have to have the opposite, then if you have life, then you have to have an afterlife. And
Mm-hmm.
what would the afterlife be? But us living in like another dimension, another point in time, that sort of thing. So it's really quite fascinating how even thousands of years ago, how they were perceiving these sorts of ideas and concepts.
And then you dovetail that into the ancient Egyptians. And I know that Egypt
Mm-hmm.
was quite an influence on you, having visited there. And the idea of the snake eating its own tail resonates throughout the entire book, which I love because it can have multiple meanings. You could take and apply it to time. You could take and apply it to even reincarnation. You could take and apply it to cycles upon Earth. You can take it, meaning creation over and over and over again. The fact that everything recycles. Tell me, Mike, when it comes to the ancient Egyptians, do you feel, and we're going to get to the idea of eternal knowledge or tapping into a higher source a little bit later in the program, but do you feel like the ancient Egyptians might have been tapped in a little better than the rest of us? Do you think maybe they tapped into that higher source a little better than we did?
Yeah, there's knowledge there that the ancients and the Egyptians had that we've lost over time. We're just really now rediscovering. So the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. Yeah, it's that symbolism of constant renewal and recycle. And the first place where we see this is on the burial shrine of King Tutankhamun, King Tut.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that's the first time it was ever used. We just know that's the oldest representation of it. They have it around his the depiction of his head, and actually around the depiction of his feet as well. And with the ancient Egyptians, of course, they believed in when you're finished with your life here, you're going on to another life in the constellation of Orion, and you'll actually see the Ouroboros used in several of the tombs within the Valley of the Kings, and that was really built upon over the years. So the alchemists over time added some other symbolism to the symbol, adding feet, the fins represent different alchemical elements. They used the two colors to represent duality. And I ended up using this symbol when I first heard the accounts coming out of Antarctica with the Anita Project and the Ice Cube Project of them discovering through their experiments with neutrinos a parallel universe running in reverse time. And I'm looking at the symbol of the Ouroboros, especially the one illustrated by Theodoros Pelikanos. And just instantly my mind connected these two things. Because if we have a universe, ours, and we're assuming ours is the one running forward in time.
Right. Well,
yeah. So if you have ours running forward in time and another one running in reverse, what happens when we get to the end and they get to the beginning? It's that same thing. The end is the beginning and the beginning is the end. And I believe that where the head and the tail meet, that's the Big Bang. So what was before the universe? The universe. What comes after the universe? The universe again. It's this constant renewing, recycling. And I believe the ancients knew these things and were passing on this message to us over all these thousands of years.
I want people to hold on to that too, because at the end of the program, I got something that's going to blow your mind.
All right.
Well, it's probably not going to blow your mind, Mike. You probably have already thought of this theory. But it didn't blow my mind either when I thought about it. But it makes a lot of sense as to something I've always thought for years and years and years. I want to get to what the rules of time are, but I think we can tackle this before the break. We've always been told when we watch movies, when we read about science fiction books, it seems like there should be no rules to time. If we're accepting that time is not a stream or a river, or that the banks can't contain time, that we can pick and choose if we're doing the stacked time theory, if we can reach into that photograph, if you will, and pull it, or if we can jump from time to time, much like Christopher Reeve and Somewhere in Time, if we can just pick a time and go to it, then why are there rules? And I'll bring up the rule in what I'm talking about here, Mike, as I sort my thoughts here. That's paradoxes. Why is it that if I go back, and we'll talk about the different paradoxes here. I want to start, first of all, with the bootstrap paradox. Why is it that there are rules to time and rules if I go back in time, if there's no rules to time?
Well, yeah. And I think that's our human mind trying to put rules onto how time works. And if we were to travel through time, how that would actually look. And so I believe that, paradoxes are just the way that some of the inconsistencies are playing out. Because I do believe people have, traveled back in time, and, we're seeing some inconsistencies within the timeline, because people, will remember things that, apparently didn't exist. And I think that's a result of, the timeline playing itself out. Something like the bootstrap paradox, you have you have no origin with an object, and somewhere in time, it's the pocket watch that Christopher Reeve's given at the very beginning of the movie by an elderly woman. He ends up taking the pocket watch back in time with him to 1912. He ends up giving it to Jane Seymour, and then when he disappears back to the future, she still has the pocket watch, and she grows old and gives it to him again. So the pocket watch has no origin, right? It's never bought. It's never found anywhere. It's just between those two characters over and over and over again in a loop. So we call that bootstrap paradox. Well, I have one of my own.
Okay.
that we don't know for sure. But it hit us. Before the show, talking a little bit about our significant others,
Yeah.
and mine, Jennifer, I had known since first grade.
Okay.
And one of the more significant things was that in first grade, we're in the library. I'm just looking through a stack of books, and all of a sudden, boom, she plants a kiss right on my cheek. I'm totally shocked at the time. What in the world, was that all about? Because we never really had that much interaction beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. We ended up drifting in and out of each other's lives. And over the course of time, as we got older, I kind of asked her about that. And she's like, I don't know. You just had this little chubby cheek sitting out there, and something told me to kiss it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, fine. So last year, we finally, all these years later, 40 some odd years later, got together. And so we're revisiting some of our old haunts and go back to the school, which is now a performing arts center for the college. But we're walking around the grounds, peeking through windows, that sort of thing. We go to where the old library was, which is now some sort of music room. And, we're kind of pointing out, there was the spot. It was right over there. All of a sudden, she starts yelling through the window, kiss him, kiss him. We're kind of laughing and having a good time with that. Cute. But then later on, it got us thinking, wait a minute. Jen said that she doesn't know what it was, but something had told her to kiss my cheek that day in first grade. Was it her 48-year-old self yelling through the window from the future? And that reverberated through time all the way to that moment in first grade. So she wouldn't have given me the kiss if herself, as a 48-year-old, hadn't said it to begin with. So that in itself would be a bootstrap paradox.
Wow. Okay. Mind blown. Yeah. Yeah. I can totally get on board with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a time, I'll admit, Mike, there was a time where I wouldn't have bought into that. But the older I get, the more I see it. The more I see it.
I think as we become more experienced with this world, as a result, ironically, of time, I think our minds do get open to some more of these different ideas. And because we see and experience so many things within our lives, it's like, yeah, I can start seeing it now. Yeah. I know what you mean, because there are plenty of things over the years that, as a much younger man, that I was very closed off to as far as different ideas. I have my whole book on shadow people, and I was very, very distinct, 20 some odd years ago of this is a shadow person, this is a spirit, that sort of thing. And then as I got older, had more experiences, it's like the lines are a little bit more blurred here, and that became that particular book. So yeah.
There's absolutely. There's a grandfather paradox out there that I've always loved when I've watched movies or read books, but to me has never seemed. And Back to the Future is probably the most famous example of this.
That's the most blatant. Yeah.
Yeah, but the idea that and the most famous scenario, if we were to go back and kill Hitler as a baby, would the Holocaust ever happen? There's that scenario too.
There's that, but they may have found a different leader and did the same thing. We don't know.
Exactly. Would the event still happen? To me, I've always been of a mind that there are huge events in history that are always destined to happen. The lesson has to be learned so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. There's always a universal lesson that has to happen in certain times in time so that humanity can evolve to where it has to be at that time. If you notice, and one of the great examples of this is when you bring up the Greeks versus where we are now. In order to learn about these different dimensions, we had to go from the philosophy of the Greeks and the philosophy of the Egyptians to where we are now in talking about these 11 different dimensions, correct?
Oh yeah, it's all a journey. And the way the Greeks and Egyptians thought about things, a little bit of a different take, a little bit of a different slant. We have more technology at our disposal these days, so we think of time in a little bit of different terms. But it's not too far off. But yeah, the idea, like with the grandfather paradox, what's interesting about that is, a lot of mainstream traditionalists will kind of discredit, that's science fiction, type of storytelling, gimmick, that sort of thing. But in the 1980s, when there's a theory that was postulated about that, paradoxes, can't possibly exist because of the math again. You got, physicists that are, calculating this out, and and it was thrown out there, time travel could happen, but paradoxes won't, nothing will be changed because of the math involved, and it would, equate out to zero. So, Joe Polchinski, who was a theoretical physicist at the time, he's since passed away, did a lot in the quantum world. So he's having a conversation with Kip Thorne, some, back and forth, and talking about this possibility. And so Polchinski throws out the idea of, well, if you have this, billiard ball that you shoot through a wormhole, and the other side of the wormhole, the billiard ball comes out and hits itself just before it enters the wormhole, then would prevent it from ever happening. Therefore, you have a paradox. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, that's the grandfather paradox. You're just, instead of, a science fiction storytelling device, like we've seen Back to the Future and, other works, it's a couple of physicists talking billiard balls. It's the same thing. Yeah. So what, that gets more credence because it's physicists rather than storytellers? Come on.
Yeah. Right. I want to tackle one more subject here before we go to break. Gosh, I'm having such fun today, Mike. I appreciate you being on the show. I want to talk about time slips before we get to break here. There's a wonderful story in the book. I'm wondering if you would retell it, having to do with the Versailles effect.
Yeah. So the Versailles time slip is probably one of the most famous ones out there. Basically, these two middle-aged, call them school teachers, but really they were college professors. I mean, the one was heading up another school, and this sort of thing. And they were really just getting to know each other because the one needed some help at her particular school. So Eleanor Jourdain, Annie Moberly, and as they're walking the grounds of Versailles, all of a sudden morphing into existence, they see people from, and they're at their point in time, it's late 1800s, but they start seeing people wearing garb from like 1700s, like pre-French Revolution. Like, this is strange. There's a guy on the stairs over here, looks like he has smallpox, and smallpox wasn't completely gone by then, but it wasn't very common. Okay. And then all of a sudden they see this woman that's painting in this very fancy bodice and all this, and it looks like Marie Antoinette. They'd seen like a plow in the garden, that there hadn't been plow of that kind in the garden for like 100 years. All this stuff, and then the image kind of faded back to the normal time. So they call this the Versailles time slip. It's really kind of going back to what we were talking about before. It was two moments in time resonating at the same frequency for a brief moment, and you get a glimpse of another point in time. And what's fascinating about that is that other point in time will also get a glimpse of you, can interact with you. So while you may be interacting with the past, they'll be interacting with the future, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take our break here. When we come back, I want to talk about the difference between a time slip and a haunting. Are we confusing one with the other? We're going to talk about that when we come back. Our guest is Mike Ricksecker. The book is absolutely fantastic, folks. I want you to go out and get a copy right now. There is a link in the description of this program. The book is Travels Through Time Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel and Stacked Time Theory, Connecting the Universe. Go get it right now. You can get it on paperback, on Kindle. We've got a link again in the description of this program. I highly recommend this book. I can't recommend this book strong enough. There are such great stories in this book, examples in this book, and so many things that are just absolutely going to blow your mind. Mike Ricksecker, our guest. When we come back, hauntings and time travel, are they one and the same? Next on the best in paranormal programming, this is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal programming. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is Mike Ricksecker. He is the author of Travels Through Time Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel and Stacked Time Theory, Connecting the Universe. Now, Mike, there's a couple of examples in the book. We don't have to go too in depth with it, but we can kind of skirt around it a little bit, if you will. You point out in the book Hans Holzer and his theories on the afterlife, and the fact that the afterlife is just the other side, or just a skip to the left as far as a dimension goes.
Right.
It's that unseen dimension that's just right there, but living right beside us. When we talk about time slips, there's a very famous one. And again, I want people to read the book to get the full perspective of the Conjuring House and Andrea Perron's sighting at the Conjuring House. The fact that she was right there when a family showed up at their table, which doesn't fully explain the haunting, but in the midst of a haunting, there's a time slip. And I want people to read that particular time slip, because that's fascinating, that within a haunting, there's a time slip. Which brings to mind this question, Mike. Are hauntings and time slips the same, or are they different? And in your mind, how are they the same or different?
They're different, but I think sometimes we experience a time slip and we believe it's a haunting. Hauntings, they can be a variety of different things. And usually we think of, human spirit as either hasn't passed on or, bound to the house, doesn't know it's a lot of different ideas behind, what that may be. But, we're thinking of this as an actual entity, being, spirit that is, still there at the home or building or whatever it is. So we see those in a variety of different ways. It may come off as an apparition, a shadow, mist, whips, all sorts of different types of things. And so when we see something that looks like a full-bodied apparition, sure, that might be a haunting, that might be a spirit, it might be a ghost, that sort of thing. But there's also a possibility we could be taking a look at a time slip, the kind of the dead giveaway for that. And there's no way, 100% surefire way to differentiate between the two. But one that is really, really helpful, if it happens, is if they look at you as if you're the ghost, then you're probably experiencing a time slip.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes complete sense. I want people to hold on to that little nugget, because we're going to use that a little bit later in the show. We're going to tie this all into one little bow. I want to talk about doppelgangers for a moment. Doppelgangers are fascinating in that we have a mutual friend out there that will post things on social media and say, there's my doppelganger, there's my doppelganger. And it's kind of fun that way. You will find pictures online of people who look a lot like you. I have a few people that look a lot like me, but how many bald older men with glasses and goatees are there out there? They're pretty common. But we want to talk about real doppelgangers. To the definition, what is a real doppelganger?
Yeah, doppelganger is the German word for double walker, and it's this idea that some sort of supernatural entity has taken its shape and form just like you. Yeah, very different than like the whole celebrity doppelganger sort of thing, celebrity look-alike. This is supposed to be some sort of entity that is taking the shape and form of you and comes off as you. Now, over time, you have a lot of legends and lore, like the Norse Vartigers and things like this, whereas they've essentially called this like an evil twin sort of thing. Now the entity is evil and nefarious and mimicking you to do different nefarious things. Of course, you have the Michael and Bridget Cleary tragedy, in which he was so convinced that a fairy changeling had taken his wife into the fairy world, and he believed that his wife was now the fairy changeling, that he ended up murdering her.
Oh,
that's taking it to an extreme.
Yeah.
But I believe that we're misinterpreting a lot of these so-called doppelgangers, and I believe a lot of these are actually some sort of time slip or fluctuation within the space-time continuum.
Why would we be seeing our own selves outside of time? What is there a message? Are we trying to send a message to ourselves?
Yeah, I think we're just, when it comes to us, right? Mm-hmm. Each person has their own personal resonance, frequency, vibration. The human personal resonance is measurable anywhere between like 9 to 16 hertz. And I think there's occasions there where we may actually tune into ourselves. Mm-hmm. So like the famous German poet Goethe, he's walking down the road to Dressenheim in Germany, and he's kind of lost in thought. He's having an affair with a woman. He's going to the town, and just kind of lost in his thought, almost like a meditative type state. And then all of a sudden, on the other side of the road, he sees this man in this interesting gold-trimmed gray suit. He's like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he's looking at the man. All of a sudden, the man disappears. Whoa, what in the world was that? He wasn't sure what to make of it. Fast forward a couple years later, he's walking down the same road in the opposite direction, gets to around the same spot, looks down, and realizes, oh my gosh, I was the guy in the gold trimmed gray suit, because he's actually wearing the thing.
Oh, wow.
And so, really bizarre. But I think what happened was, because he was in a meditative state, he was lost in thought. And, we are all, we all are familiar with this sort of thing. We might be mowing the lawn and kind of zone out, or sometimes while we're driving, we zone out, we miss our turn. Oh, shoot, so I think that's what was going on with him. And so he was in that type of a state. Our brain has all kinds of different, states of being. And I think in that moment, he was able to tune into himself, his own frequency, resonance, vibration at another point in time, and got a glimpse of that.
I can see that. When we do meditate, we do get to a higher vibration, and maybe we do meet that vibration of ourselves in another time, and we meet ourselves. I can see that. Although, what accounts for somebody else seeing our doppelganger and we don't see it? Is it that fact that we meet that vibration and we just don't meet the glance of the other doppelganger? Is it as simple as that?
There's some interesting cases. Like similar to like the Norse Vartigers, where their idea of what a Vartiger is that your doppelganger, your double, enters into a location before you, kind of precedes you. Mm-hmm. And people will be like, oh, hey, there's Tim, there's Mike, whomever it is. And a minute later, all of a sudden the exact same thing happens, where it's like there's Tim or there's Mikey. I'm like, what? And they're like, what happened just there? And it's all the exact. And then what's interesting is it's always the exact same movements, responses, this sort of thing. And I include a story of that sort of thing happening to a woman in Turkey. Mm. And what I think is happening here, it's almost like a displacement in time. And I get into interdimensional phasing and things like this when we talk about doppelgangers. And I think it's a time displacement that's happening. And so it's almost like a premonition. It's, playing out before it actually happens, because it is going to happen. It is going to happen right there in that moment. And in some senses, it already has happened. When we think of everything in the stack of time, mm-hmm. But there's something about that moment that, as it's reverberating, across the stack, that, people get an early glimpse of that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, boom, then it actually happens.
What is it with, now, is there such a thing then in your mind of a doppelganger being a diabolical? So is there such a thing as a demonic becoming a doppelganger?
Yeah, in those cases, because again, we do have supernatural entities and these sorts of things. You have like the jinn that try to be tricksters, and they might, do something, of that nature. So yeah, you never rule out the fact that it, might be something like that. But when you're just seeing, somebody run into a room and then run back out, and then all of a sudden, a minute later, the same person runs into the room and runs back out. Nothing diabolical is going on. Mm-hmm. That one was probably a time slip. But yeah, if you have one that shows up looking like you and starts doing, evil, nasty, nefarious things, it's totally out of character. Okay, that might be something else.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get into that eternal source of knowledge that we were talking about earlier in dreams. There's a wonderful Aboriginal dream world that you talk about. And I want to get into that concept real quick and talk about that. Can you explain to people what I'm talking about? Because I think you describe it a lot better than I can. And having to do with the idea that time is not linear at all. And the fact that they don't live within a timescape or... I'm butchering it, Mike. Bail me out here.
Yeah.
What is it that they do?
The Aboriginal dream time, it's really fascinating. And it really ties into everything that we've been talking about because, in this belief system of there with the dream time, everything is concurrent. There is no past, there is no present, there is no future. It's all now. And so, when they talk about their, creation of the universe and all of that, like those beings who, according to their traditions, have created the universe, they're still here. And it's still that time. We're actually still within creation because there is no time. It's here. It's now. It's ever present. And so it's a little difficult, I think, for us to kind of wrap our heads around this idea that time is ever present. It is always here with us. And it's almost like there is no beginning, there is no end because it's always there. But in a sense there is, because there is a beginning, there is an end. It's a constant recycle. But with them, it's just always.
Wow. I love that idea. There's also, you bring up a really, really cool example. We're both fans of the Rocky franchise. I love the Rocky franchise. Rocky Balboa was just on TV the other day, and when I was reading the example in the book of Rocky Balboa, I got chills. And you talk about the ideas that you had before the movies came out, and explain to people what I'm talking about with the idea that we have this connected consciousness to the universe. That these ideas are out there in the universe. I know when I'm talking about. Like I have a guitar right next to me. It's a Wolfgang USA, the exact one that Eddie Van Halen played on stage.
Nice.
It's the one thing I've ever spoiled myself with. But occasionally I'll pick up the guitar, and I know that, if I'm just doodling around on a guitar, I know the difference between forcing a note and playing around and trying to come up with something, and when something just flows through me and I don't have control over it. There's connecting to that consciousness.
So there's the idea of the collective unconscious, which was postulated by Carl Jung, this famous psychologist from back 100 years ago, right?
Yep.
And this idea is that that unconscious part of ourselves can pick up on universal knowledge that, for lack of a better term, is floating around out there in the ether. And it's why, at different points in time, you'll see, all of a sudden, 5 people from, 6 people, whatever, from across the world, no connection to each other, all suddenly trying to invent the same thing, light bulb or telegraph or whatever. And all of a sudden, the race is on suddenly out of nowhere. So, the thing with Rocky, it's really bizarre, is apparently I was picking up on whatever Stallone was grabbing from, kind of what we call his muse, right?
Right.
In creative people, a lot of times will say, I don't know where it came from. Like the whole dream time thing, with that chapter, the paragraph that I concluded it with, I was writing about the dream time in the middle of the night. I could not sleep. And all of a sudden, I got up, and I don't usually write very well at night, but I'm like, let me work on this, into this chapter a little bit. That final paragraph of that chapter, I have no idea where it came from. It was like 3:30 in the morning. And it's like, I'm looking at that later. I'm like, I can't believe I wrote that. It was actually a really good paragraph.
Oh, wow.
That kind of summed up time.
Yeah.
When it comes to Stallone in the Rocky franchise, so I really, loved the Rocky movies as a kid. And, after number 2, that gap between 2 and 3, I was at my grandparents' house, and I'm just, writing some little stories. And I wrote my own version of Rocky 3, in which my version has Apollo Creed becoming friends with Rocky, and Rocky fights a Russian. Well, in Rocky 3, he becomes friends with Apollo Creed, and in number 4, he fights a Russian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of ironic. That's cool. That's cute. So sometime after Rocky 4, talking with my mom in the kitchen at the house, just kind of whatever. And because I think we had just watched number 4.
Okay.
And I'm like, I liked Rocky better when he was, when he was poor. We didn't have as much money. I kind of liked his character better, and he was kind of more quirky or whatever. I liked it better when he didn't have all this money.
Yep.
Number 5, sure enough, he loses all of his money. So now I got a big 15-year gap between number 5 and Rocky Balboa. Nothing was going on forever. Number 5 kind of bombed at the box office.
Yeah.
So during that time, I had a dream one night that they were going forth with a Rocky 6. They were going forth with a 6th movie. And in my dream, I'm basically watching the movie. And in this movie, Adrian is on her deathbed. She's dying. And how does number 6 start off? She's dead. Yeah. So it's like, okay, this is bizarre. But basically, and it was just little tidbits like that. It wasn't like I got the whole movie downloaded to my head or whatever, just like little snippets, because I believe that, I was so enamored with that movie. I was so connected to it. I took so many life lessons away from those movies that I tapped into a little bit of whatever Stallone was getting out of the collective unconscious.
And people are I think people are going to maybe that aren't fans of Stallone may chuckle a little bit when I say this and may go, oh, come on, Tim. But he really is a creative force. He really
is.
And especially with that character, he's really tapped into something through that character. And through that character, he's tapped into something very powerful. And really, like you just pointed out, really taught some very important moral lessons. But through Rocky Balboa, the movie, that 6th one you're talking about, really teaches a lot about grief, loss, dying, and renewal. There's renewal there too.
There is
in that movie, which is interesting. Again, that snake eating its own tail.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, Tim. Yeah, because it connects, his cycle that he's going through within the movie, but also cycles back to, the original movie. And you get, the great life lesson. Now how hard you hit is how hard you get hit and keep moving forward, those sorts of things.
That's right.
And, there's a lot to take away. And I think people don't give Stallone enough credit. And I think it has to do with the way he talks. People don't realize he's actually partially paralyzed in his face, and that's why he talks like that.
Yeah.
So, it's unfortunate, but he's definitely a very, very creative force, and those within Hollywood know how much of a creative force he is.
That's right. Absolutely. But that chapter on dreams and eternal knowledge, I encourage people to really read that chapter, soak it in, because it's mind blowing. It really is mind blowing. When you think you have an original idea, stop and think about it, because chances are it's been thought of before, it's been done before. You may be taking a glimmer of it or a glimpse of it from the universe. You could put your own spin on it based on your life experience, but it probably isn't yours to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that's where the color of our universe kind of comes from. Yes, there's this eternal knowledge that's out there, but like you said, we put our own spin on it. So in many ways, it seems new, refreshed. You take like the hero's journey, right? We all know the story. We see it in Star Wars, we see it in Lord of the Rings, we see it in like most of them, especially action adventure movies. We see the same story played out, different characters, a little bit of different spin, maybe different setting or environment. It's essentially the same story that we've been telling ourselves, for thousands and thousands of years. And so, that's an interesting chapter, because I have, Mark Anthony gives some insight on dreams, and I have Emily Harrison from the Akashic Academy talk about the Akashic Records, which has a lot of similarities to, the collective unconscious from Jung.
One of the things we didn't talk about, I want to get into with you briefly. We may split a little bit on this, but I think we agree on most of it. I want to talk about the Mandela effect.
Okay.
I have a problem with the Mandela effect, but let's talk about it briefly. Let our listeners know a little bit about the background of the Mandela effect and where it comes from.
Yeah. So this idea was postulated around 10 years ago when Nelson Mandela passed away. There were many people out there that thought that he had actually passed away back in the 1980s when he was in prison. And, following that, there was some fallout that Fiona Broome ended up coining the term the Mandela effect. The other people started realizing that there are other things that people were remembering differently. Mm-hmm. A lot of it had to do with branding.
Yeah.
The way Fruit Loops was spelled, or Oscar Mayer, or how does the song "We Are the Champions" and things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of it was out of pop culture,
mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were misremembering all these things the same exact way. And so, and I don't know what your exact take is on it. I mean, I believe a lot of these are just a mass misremembering,
mm-hmm.
but I think there are some elements that do play out in which we can see something's a little bit different with time. And I don't want to spoil the whole thing here. It's
don't spoil the whole thing.
But I give an example of one that you will not find in any of the top 50 Mandela effect lists that are out there on the internet that I and my mother actually experienced.
Yeah, and I encourage people to read the book to get that one, because that one is original. I find, and maybe you will agree with me, maybe I misconstrued and I jumped on that one. Mandela effect to me is a lot of people nowadays, is just a lot of people using it as an excuse for being lazy and not remembering history. Yeah, that is a lot of what people are doing. It's a lot of people not bothering to pay attention to current culture or past culture. It's okay, I live in the here and now. I don't give a shit about what happened 30 years ago. And or they don't bother to remember what it is that happens with other people. They're too engrossed in what is happening in their own lives. So when you have something like a current celebrity who dies, who was just working 3 years ago, Mike, and they go, I haven't heard anything from that person in years. Well, they just released an album 2 years ago. Come on.
Right.
And Mandela effect, I haven't heard from him in 10 years. That's because you're not paying attention. That's a lot of what it is. People use Mandela effect as a reason for them to tune out of society. Last night we went and saw Motley Crue and Def Leppard, and people don't realize Def Leppard's had a bunch of albums, bunch since they're the last huge one, Adrenalize, in the early 90s. But they've put out a lot since it. So I get it. Yeah, but people will go to the concert who probably stopped listening to Def Leppard pre-2000 and go, I haven't heard from these guys in 23 years. No, they've been out there. You just stopped paying attention. Right? Yeah, exactly.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, people do stop paying attention. And and some, again, I think some of these things just get misremembered.
Yeah.
I think the one with was Mr. Monopoly wearing a monocle, that sort of thing. It's I'm kind of mixing it with Mr. Peanut,
Right.
So I can see those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some legit ones out there, and the one that we've brought up on the program before is the death of Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas, and I remember seeing the ET obituary on Kirk Douglas years before he actually died. I remember his son getting on the air, Michael Douglas, and talking about, and he was a much younger man, talking about, it's a shame he was such a great actor. I remember seeing the highlight reel of Spartacus and all this other stuff. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, no, he didn't die. And I went, well, wait a minute. No. I saw it on ET. I remember Mary Hart was there. She was talking about, what a great actor he was. And people are like, oh, you're crazy. He didn't die. It's like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. And so I think there are some legit ones. It's not, it's not a ton. It's not some of these, quirky branding ones. But I think what happens, and I think this is, the effect of time travelers, people have gone back, and it's not like they went back, we're going to kill Kirk Douglas. That's
right.
not the intention, right?
Of all the people.
Or we're going to go back and save his life or whatever.
Right.
And it's the result of, they have gone back. Maybe it could just been they were watching, observing, whatever, and they accidentally did something to affect a little thing over here. And then, it's the butterfly effect. And something greater ended up happening as a result of that. And so I think that's where, some of these actual more legitimate cases of, no, we're remembering something in thousands of people across the world, no contact with each other, each remembering these things exactly the same. It's like, something got changed up here.
Right, right. And that example in the book is one of those, which I find fascinating. I really do find fascinating. So, yes.
Yeah, because that was really obscure. That was really obscure. But there were several people, not just myself and my mother, but other people from across the world that were remembering the exact same thing.
Right.
And it's like, this is, how all these people and this little obscure thing.
Right. Don't get me wrong. There are legitimate Mandela effect cases out there. I just find them rare. I mean, they're like gems. You find them along the way and you go, wow, that's right. That was that way. How come I don't remember it? You bring up the one with although people say they don't remember it, they remember it a certain way, but it's really this way in the movie is Mr. Rogers, the song.
Yeah.
So
was it a beautiful day in the neighborhood? Or a beautiful day in this neighborhood?
It's a beautiful.
And even the movie title is "Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood." It's like he's saying it as this.
Yeah, this. Yeah. So that's an interesting one as well. Let's move on.
Sure.
I want to talk about, we're going to get to aliens here in just a moment, as we're starting to tick down. Speaking of time, we're going in a linear sequence here, and we're going, of course, from the beginning of the podcast to the end of the podcast. We're getting pretty close to the end here. But I want to talk about AI, simulated universes. Are we in a matrix? A lot of people may think that, and a lot of people have talked about, and this is a theory that's gaining steam here, Mike, that the universe we're in now is the simulation, and that we don't live in reality here, that reality is somewhere else, that this entire world is a simulation. Do you buy that theory?
Yeah, but not in, whenever we talk about simulated universe, immediately people think of the Matrix. And I don't think it's, a computer simulation. We use computers as that idea right now because that's our most current technology.
Yeah.
Nikola Tesla thought of, AI and the idea basically of a, sentient being type robot, over 100 years ago. But he had no idea it was going to be like what we're doing now with, like drone technology and all that, with silicone microchips and all that sort of thing. He thought it was going to be radio waves and, gears and wheels and all that sort of thing. But he had the idea. And I think that's where we're at now, is we have the idea for it, but we don't really know how it will really play out in the future, or how it really does actually play out now and exists. I think it's more organic and biological in nature. But our ancient civilizations, religions, they all talk about that. They just don't use the word simulation. Like Eastern philosophy, reincarnation talks about we're in a home world, come down when we're born, we live a life, we learn some lessons. When we pass away, we go back up, and then we constantly recycle. And so, that right there is really the idea. Same thing, of like logging into a computer program, playing out the simulation, where there's video game, flight simulator, all kinds of different things we simulate, and people don't really think about it. And then we log back out. So it's the same type of idea, and but they don't use the word simulation. No, that's just cycle of life.
Yeah. Okay, I got you there. With that, let's get to the topic of aliens. We're going to work. Sure. We're going to work we're going to work with the time part of it first, and then we're going to get into the actual theories. Remember, I've been telling people that kind of hold on to this nugget, hold on to this nugget, hold on to this nugget. We're getting to the monster at the end of the book here, Mike, eventually, which we'll get there here in just a few minutes. You have a chapter on UFO abductions and time loss. And with that, I've always found that phenomena interesting. People say, well, I've had an experience with a UFO. I've had an experience with aliens, or I think I have. I remember seeing a light, and then the next thing I know, 36 hours have passed, 48 hours have passed, or even just 3 hours have passed. And I'm on one side of the county, and the next I'm on another side of the county. Could this just be, and I'm going to take a skeptical side here, could this just be, I zoned out, or one of those, I'm in my own mind, or, who's got the most interesting story about this is recently I was, you're going to laugh when I tell you this. I was watching a video on Drink Champs, and George Clinton is talking from Parliament Funkadelic. He's talking about him and Bootsy Collins were coming back from on tour. And they said, I had nothing in my system. In fact, we had to stop by the liquor store. But on the way to the liquor store from the airport, he said, me and Bootsy are in the car from the airport. We're going to stop home, then go to the liquor store. So he and Bootsy, as they're driving home, look up in the sky, and Bootsy goes, what the hell is that? And points up in the sky, and they see these bright lights. And as they see these bright lights, they stop and get out of the car, and they look at these bright lights. Then they remember getting back in the car and getting home, realizing they've lost 4 hours. Mm-hmm. So they remember getting out, looking at these lights, and then getting back in the car, having lost 4 hours and gone home. Meanwhile, the wife is like, where have you been? Your flight landed, 4.5, 5 hours ago. Where does that time go? And what happened to George Clinton and Bootsy Collins?
You're right. Exactly. When it comes to UFOs, the abductions, the time loss, again, when we think about extraterrestrials, we're kind of caught in this idea that they're all working within our same dimension. They're all working within our same rule set. And yeah, that might be true for UFOs, extraterrestrials that have taken a flight here. If somehow they have a long enough lifespan that their body and their resources will survive, Newtonian physics and traveling all those light years. It's a little hard pressed for them to do that. Or maybe they have figured out like the Einstein-Rosen bridge and they've taken a wormhole, that sort of thing. But I think a lot of these are probably traveling interdimensionally. They have figured something out to be able to traverse the different dimensions. Okay. And so if that is true, that they have figured out how to travel interdimensionally, well, like we were talking about earlier, when you supersede the fourth dimension time that we are in, you're in the fifth or somewhere beyond, time is an object. Mm-hmm. So if they are performing some sort of abduction, maybe they're going to study, run some experiments, whatever it is they're doing, we have a lot of different ideas. If they are taking them back to their dimension for a little while, well, time most likely is going to work differently in that space, wherever they're at, fifth, sixth, seventh dimension, whatever it is. And so 5 minutes might actually be an hour or two, this sort of thing. When you look at some of the different abduction cases, like Travis Walton, Betty and Barney Hill, those sorts of things, the time really worked differently. And we can even go back into some of our older texts, like the like fairy lore and things like this, where instead of extraterrestrials, it was fairies, and they were being taken into the quote unquote fairy realm. Right. Same thing, like an abduction, like we consider with UFOs and ETs now. But we see a lot of the similarities of time worked differently, and people thought the person was gone for a full day or two, and they're dancing around with the fairies or whatever they're doing, and all of a sudden the person's like, oh, it was only 5 minutes to me. Yeah, it was quite different. So you see a lot of these type of cases like that, and it seems like whatever that realm is, wherever they get taken, is on some other dimensional plane, some other plane of existence.
Okay. Real quick, here it is. Here's the theory, and then we're going to wrap it up. Are you ready, Mike?
All right.
All right, here's the theory. As I'm reading your book, it occurs to me. Years ago, I used to say 95% of the things you see in the sky are man-made and are us, okay? Mm-hmm. Your book summed it up for me perfectly. You connected all the dots for me. And here's why. I still maintain it's that. And when you say stacked time theory in photographs, all stacked together, and as you're saying, as we go further in time, or as if you're talking about, as the stack gets bigger, and as we start to head towards the end of time, as our timeline does, the timeline that's on the other side of that is heading backwards. If you notice, the UFOs backwards in time, like in the 1940s, were looking like little metal saucers. Now they're getting into triangles and other shapes, right? They're getting more advanced. The timelines are meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're getting more advanced. Yeah. That's us getting more advanced. That's us traveling back in time and getting more advanced. The timelines are meeting each other. The stacks, we're getting back further and further in the stacks, and we're meeting those stacks of photographs in the middle. In other words, we're meeting ourselves. There you go.
Yeah, that's one that I agree with. I do believe that some of these extraterrestrials, that the UAPs, UFOs that we are seeing and witnessing, some of them are ourselves. I don't believe they're all ourselves, but I think some are.
I think we had some help. Don't get me wrong. I think we had some help.
Yeah.
There.
No, we definitely had help, and I've talked to people in the know. Say, well, we got this technology and that technology from not ourselves.
Yeah.
And but so something that I throw out there in the book is ideas that people don't usually think about. Is okay. We're talking time travelers from the future. Somebody that's indigenous to Earth, ourselves, that has come from the future to our point in time. We're seeing ourselves. Maybe you're coming back to research, examine the past. They might have there might be a resource that we have now that they don't have in the future. They need to come back and get. That's all well and good. But the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, right? People don't really realize how old that is. It still pales in comparison to the rest of the universe. That's a long, long time. You think about this. The dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. Yeah. And that's just like over 1% of the entire lifespan of the Earth.
Yeah.
So you think about how long ago that was. So over the course of the next, say, 65 million years, will humans still be around here? Will we go extinct in that time? It's possible. Or we may have done something like conditions here on Earth got so bad that we found another planet to go to. Okay, fine. So let's say humans are no longer here at that point in time. The Earth is still going on another 5 billion years, by the way. So over that course of time, what if a couple different things could happen? An extraterrestrial life form from another planet finds Earth.
Well, it was at that point in the program where I accidentally lost Mike because of some technical issues with Xfinity. Can't exactly give him a round of applause there. And I was unable to complete the conversation with Mike. I wish we could have finished that conversation. You may think that it might have been aliens. We'll leave it to aliens that cut off our conversation with Mike. I'm so sorry, folks. We were onto something there with the fact that aliens might have been time travelers. Time travelers might be aliens, or it might be aliens and time travelers. But it was a great conversation with Mike Ricksecker. The book, I highly encourage you folks to pick up Travels Through Time Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory, Connecting the Universe. We have a link to it in the description of this program. Folks, I can't say enough about this book. It is so good, so good. And lots of great stories in there. Lots of great theories in there as well. And Mike Ricksecker has outdone himself with this book. Again, a link in the description of this program. Pick up the book right now. Folks, I also want to thank you so much for continuing to tune in to these great shows here on Darkness Radio. Thank you for being such great listeners and patrons of the program. I want to ask you one favor. To continue being great listeners and patrons of the program, I need you to do one other favor for me, and that's this. Check out our sponsors. We can't continue to do this program unless you support our sponsors. And our sponsors are great sponsors at that. What they do is allow us to continue doing this program and allow us to put on these great programs for you. Both Mint Mobile and Factor have put their money where their mouth is, and they've come up with some great deals for you to try. Stick to your wellness goals with premium, ready-to-eat meals from Factor. Give them a try, folks. They have some wonderful meals, tasty meals, and they help you stick to those wellness goals in the middle of summer. It's hot out there. You don't want to eat, I know, or you're eating the wrong stuff on the go. Don't do that. Stick to your wellness goals with premium ready-to-eat meals from Factor. Head to factormeals.com/darkness50. Use the code darkness50. And guess what? At checkout, you're going to get 50% off your order. Give them a try today. Also, Mint Mobile. You know it's got to be a good company because Ryan Reynolds owns the thing. Come on. Deadpool owns it. Get unlimited talk, text, and high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. It's just $15 a month. That's 15. $15 a month. Switch to Mint Mobile today to get your new wireless plan. Go to mintmobile.com/darkness. I've got it on my iPhone. I'm telling you, the reception, impeccable. I get it everywhere. And yes, I tried to set up a hotspot with Mike. We ran out of time today. Otherwise, we would have had Mike right back on the phone today, and we would have set up the beginnings of the second part of the interview and found out more about time travelers and aliens. But unfortunately, we ran out of time with Mike today. So unfortunately, I would have loved to have continued this conversation. I was having so much fun today. Mike was having fun today, too. He did send me a message and say that he was having a blast with the conversation. And we'll pick it up again next time with Mike Ricksecker. Again, pick up that book. Travels Through Time. Folks, I want you to go take care of yourself and each other this weekend. Again, look in on an elderly neighbor as we get through summer here. And the southern part of the U.S. is just still a scorcher in August. Make sure that the elderly are being taken care of, the infirm are being taken care of, and that they're getting what they need out there. Be sure you're hydrating. I know I sound like your mother right now. Be sure you're hydrating. Be sure you're getting your nutrition. Make sure that the elderly and infirm out there are getting what they need as well. Look in on your neighbors and your community. It's time for us to start coming together as a community and looking after each other. Because the world is becoming kind of an ugly place. We need to be the example that we want to see in the world. You know, get out there and start looking after one another and making sure that we're all okay. That's what we need to do. And just do it as a favor to your buddies here at Darkness Radio. We've got a great week of shows lined up next week. We're going to be talking the Taco Bell Killer. That's right. We're going to be talking about that next Tuesday here on True Crime Tuesday. Got some other stuff in store for you as well next week. For Beer City Bruiser, for Mally Fox, for Jessica Freeberg, I'm Tim Dennis. Thank you so much for tuning in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio.